There comes a day when you stop explaining, not because you have nothing left to say, but because you finally understand that some people were never listening to understand you. They were listening to reply, listening to defend themselves, listening to twist your words, listening to find the one sentence they could use against you, listening just enough to make you feel like maybe if you explained it better, softer, calmer, more perfectly, they would finally understand your heart. So you kept explaining. You explained why you were hurt. You explained why their silence affected you. You explained why their words stayed in your mind for days. You explained why you needed more consistency. You explained why something that looked small to them felt heavy to you. You explained your intentions, your feelings, your boundaries, your pain, your entire inner world. And still, they misunderstood you. Or maybe they did understand. They just did not want to be responsible for what understanding would require from them. That is the part that changes everything. Because one day, you realize that you are not exhausted because you failed to explain yourself. You are exhausted because you kept explaining yourself to people who benefited from not understanding you. People who made you feel dramatic for reacting to what hurt you. People who called you sensitive because your honesty made them uncomfortable. People who demanded your softness while refusing to respect your boundaries. People who made you feel like every emotion needed evidence before it could be valid. And slowly, you began to believe that maybe your pain was the problem. Maybe you were too much. Maybe you explained it badly. Maybe you needed to say it differently. Maybe you needed to be calmer. Maybe you needed to make it easier for them to hear you. So you tried again. You chose better words. You softened your tone. You removed the anger. You swallowed the tears. You made your pain sound smaller so it would not threaten them. You tried to make your truth gentle enough for them to accept. But no matter how carefully you spoke, they still found a way not to hear you. And that is when something inside you becomes tired. Not angry, not cruel, just tired. Tired of translating your heart to people who keep pretending they do not understand the language. Tired of defending emotions that should have been respected the first time. Tired of shrinking your truth so it can fit inside someone else's comfort. Tired of carrying the burden of being clear to people who are committed to staying confused. Because there is a kind of pain that comes from being misunderstood. But there is a deeper pain that comes from begging to be understood by someone who has already decided who they want you to be. They do not want your truth. They want their version of you. The version that is easier to blame. The version that is easier to dismiss. The version that makes them innocent. The version that makes your pain look unreasonable. And as long as they can keep you explaining, they can keep you trapped. Because explanation becomes a loop. You explain, they deny. You clarify, they twist. You soften, they minimize. You defend, they accuse. And suddenly, the original wound disappears under the exhaustion of trying to prove that it hurt. You are no longer talking about what they did. You are now defending your right to feel. And that is where you begin losing yourself. Because the more you beg to be understood, the more you start abandoning your own inner knowing. You start needing their agreement before you trust your pain. You start needing their validation before you believe your memory. You start needing their apology before you allow yourself to feel wounded. You start waiting for them to admit the truth before you give yourself permission to move on. But your pain does not need their permission to be real. Your memory does not need their approval to be valid. Your boundary does not need their understanding to be necessary. And your peace does not need their agreement to matter. The day you stop begging to be understood is the day you stop making someone else the judge of your reality. You stop standing in front of people with your heart in your hands, asking them to please see that it is bleeding. You stop trying to make people care by explaining how deeply they hurt you. You stop believing that if they truly understood, they would finally change. Because sometimes they understand enough. They understand that their silence hurts you. They understand that their inconsistency confuses you. They understand that their words cut deeper than they want to admit. They understand that their absence makes you anxious. They understand that you are asking for something basic. But understanding is not the same as willingness. And when a person is not willing to be honest, your explanation becomes a place where your energy goes to die. You can spend months trying to make someone understand what they already know. You can spend years trying to make someone admit what they keep avoiding. You can waste your whole heart trying to turn someone's defensiveness into empathy. But you cannot explain someone into caring. You cannot explain someone into emotional maturity. You cannot explain someone into accountability. You cannot explain someone into becoming safe. And once you understand this, silence becomes powerful. Not the silence of punishment, not the silence of manipulation, not the silence of someone hoping to be chased, but the silence of a person who has finally stopped auditioning for empathy. The silence of someone who no longer needs to prove the obvious. The silence of someone who has said enough. The silence of someone who has learned that being misunderstood by the wrong people is not a life sentence. It is information. It tells you where your heart is not safe. It tells you where your truth will always be turned into an argument. It tells you where your pain will always be treated like a debate. It tells you where your softness will be used against you. And once you know that, you do not need to keep presenting evidence. You need to leave the courtroom. Because some people turn relationships into courtrooms. Every feeling needs proof. Every wound needs witnesses. Every boundary needs a defense. Every reaction is cross-examined. Every sentence you say can be used against you later. And you keep standing there, trying to win the case of your own pain. But love should not feel like a trial. Connection should not require you to become a lawyer for your own heart. You should not have to build a perfect argument just to be treated with basic care. You should not have to explain your pain in a way that makes the person who hurt you comfortable. You should not have to beg someone to understand the consequences of their own behavior. And if you do, then maybe the problem is not your explanation. Maybe the problem is the audience, because the right people do not need you to bleed perfectly before they believe you. The right people do not require you to collapse before they take you seriously. The right people do not make your pain about their ego. The right people do not punish you for having feelings. They may not understand everything immediately. They may need a conversation. They may need time. But they will care enough to try. And that is the difference. Some people misunderstand you because they need clarity. Others misunderstand you because understanding you would require them to change. And you must learn the difference. Because if you do not, you will spend your life giving deeper explanations to people who only wanted easier access to you. You will keep trying to be more understandable, more patient, more gentle, more forgiving, more emotionally convenient, until one day you realize you have become fluent in explaining yourself, but completely disconnected from yourself. You know how to make your pain sound acceptable, but you no longer know how to honor it. You know how to translate your feelings into language other people can tolerate, but you no longer know how to simply feel them. You know how to defend your boundaries, but you no longer know how to trust them without a debate. That is why you must stop begging to be understood. Not because communication does not matter. Communication matters deeply. But communication only works with people who are willing to hear the truth. Communication cannot heal a connection where one person is honest and the other is strategic. Communication cannot save a relationship where your vulnerability becomes ammunition. Communication cannot create safety with someone who is more committed to winning than understanding. And at some point, you must ask yourself, am I explaining because this person truly wants to understand? Or am I explaining because I am afraid of being misrepresented? Am I trying to create closeness? Or am I trying to prove that I am not the villain in someone else's story? Am I communicating? Or am I begging for permission to be human? These questions will change you, because the moment you answer honestly, you may realize that many conversations in your life weren't conversations. They were performances. You were performing calmness so you would not be called dramatic. You were performing maturity so you would not be called needy. You were performing understanding so you would not be called selfish. You were performing emotional control so someone else could avoid responsibility for the way they hurt you. And that kind of performance slowly destroys your soul. Because every time you silence the real intensity of what you feel, you teach yourself that your truth is dangerous. Every time you make your pain smaller to be accepted, you teach yourself that your emotions are too heavy. Every time you overexplain to someone who keeps misunderstanding you, you teach yourself that your reality is not enough unless someone else approves it. But it is enough. Your truth is enough. Your pain is enough. Your boundary is enough. Your silence is enough. You do not need to make everyone understand why you are stepping back. You do not need to explain your exhaustion to people who created it. You do not need to write a perfect speech for someone who has already chosen not to listen. Sometimes the most peaceful sentence is the one you never send. Sometimes the most powerful explanation is your absence. Sometimes the clearest boundary is the moment you stop trying to convince someone that you deserved better. Because you did. Even if they never admit it, even if they call you difficult, even if they say you changed, even if they say you misunderstood, even if they rewrite the story in a way that protects them, you still know what happened inside you. You still know how it felt. You still know what it cost you. And that knowing must become enough. Because if your inner knowing is never enough, you will keep returning to people who make you doubt yourself. You will keep asking them to confirm the wound they caused. You will keep waiting for the person who confused you to become the person who clarifies everything. But the person who benefits from your confusion may never give you clarity. The person who avoids accountability may never give you closure. The person who made you feel small may never admit that you had to shrink around them. And waiting for that admission can keep you emotionally trapped for years. So the day you stop begging to be understood is the day you take your reality back. You stop saying, "Please understand me." And you start saying, "I understand myself." You stop saying, "Please see my pain." And you start saying, "I see my pain." You stop saying, "Please admit what happened." And you start saying, "I do not need your admission to trust what I lived." That is where freedom begins. Quietly. Not in revenge. Not in anger. Not in proving them wrong. But in the moment you no longer need their understanding to feel whole. And yes, it may hurt. It may hurt to realize that someone you cared about could misunderstand you so easily. It may hurt to realize that they may never see the situation the way you see it. It may hurt to know that their version of the story may make you look colder, harsher, or more difficult than you were. But you cannot keep living as a prisoner of how people choose to interpret you. You cannot keep exhausting yourself trying to control every version of your name in someone else's mouth. You cannot keep explaining your soul to people who only want a version of you they can blame. At some point, you have to let them misunderstand you. Let them think what they need to think. Let them tell the story in the way their ego can survive. Let them call your boundary distance. Let them call your silence pride. Let them call your peace coldness. Let them call your growth selfishness. Because their interpretation does not have to become your identity. You are allowed to be misunderstood and still be free. You are allowed to walk away without being fully seen. You are allowed to stop explaining before everyone agrees with your reasons. You are allowed to protect yourself without presenting your pain like evidence. And the moment you accept that, you become dangerous to every pattern that once controlled you. Because a person who no longer begs to be understood cannot be easily manipulated by guilt. They cannot be pulled into endless arguments. They cannot be trapped by someone's refusal to listen. They cannot be controlled by the fear of being misrepresented. They know who they are, and they no longer hand that knowing to people who do not know how to hold it. This is the beginning of a different kind of strength, a quiet strength, a strength that does not need to shout, a strength that does not need to defend every move, a strength that does not need to explain every silence, a strength that simply knows, I have said enough, I have tried enough, I have explained enough, and now I choose peace. Not because I stopped caring, not because I have no emotions left, not because their words no longer hurt, but because I finally understand that my peace cannot depend on someone else's willingness to understand me. There is a moment when you stop bringing your pain back to the same people who keep mishandling it. You stop handing them the softest parts of you and hoping this time they will be careful. You stop entering the same conversation with a different sentence, believing the right words will finally open the wrong heart. Because the truth is, the right words do not matter to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. You can be gentle, you can be clear, you can be calm, you can be honest. You can explain the same wound in 10 different ways. But if someone does not want to see what their behavior did to you, they will keep finding a way not to see it. And once you understand this, you stop begging. You stop begging for empathy. You stop begging for softness. You stop begging for accountability. You stop begging for someone to finally say, I understand why that hurt you. Because real understanding does not need to be forced out of someone. Real care does not need to be chased. Real love does not make you stand in front of it, exhausted, trying to prove that your heart deserves basic respect. And this is where your silence becomes different. Before, your silence may have been pain, a silent hope that they would notice, a silent wish that they would come closer, a silent attempt to make them feel what they made you feel. But now, your silence is not a game. It is not a test. It is not a punishment. It is no longer a hidden request to be understood. It is acceptance. Acceptance that some people will never meet you in the place where your truth lives. Acceptance that some people will only understand the version of you that protects their ego. Acceptance that some people will choose comfort over honesty every time. And once you accept that, you stop fighting reality. You no longer need to drag someone into awareness. You no longer need to make them admit what they did. You no longer need to keep correcting the story they tell about you, because you finally know that being misunderstood does not make you wrong. Being blamed does not make you guilty. Being called difficult does not mean your boundary was unfair. Being called cold does not mean your silence was cruel. Sometimes people call you cold because they no longer have access to the warmth they took for granted. Sometimes they call you dramatic because your feelings expose what they don't want to face. Sometimes they say you changed because the version of you who tolerated everything is no longer available. And that is not something to apologize for. That is growth. You are allowed to become someone who no longer overexplains. You are allowed to become someone who does not defend every emotion. You are allowed to become someone who walks away without making everyone comfortable with your decision. You are allowed to stop giving people the chance to misunderstand you again and again. Because your life is not a courtroom. Your heart is not evidence. Your pain is not a debate. And your truth does not need to win an argument to be real. The day you stop begging to be understood is the day you begin to understand yourself more deeply. You begin to ask why you needed their understanding so badly, why their version of the story had so much power over you, why being misread felt like being erased, why you kept returning to people who made you feel like your emotions needed permission. And the answer may be painful. Maybe you wanted them to understand you because you thought their understanding would finally prove you were not too much. Maybe you wanted them to admit the truth because you thought their admission would release you from self-doubt. Maybe you wanted them to see your pain because you were tired of being the only witness to it. Maybe you wanted closure because part of you believed you could not move on until they agreed with your reality. But you can. You can move on without their agreement. You can heal without their apology. You can leave without being understood. You can choose peace even if they never know the full depth of what they did. And that may feel unfair, because part of you still wants them to see it, to feel it, to recognize it, to finally understand that you were not trying to attack them. You were trying to be heard. You were not trying to create conflict. You were trying to protect your heart. You were not asking for perfection. You were asking for care. But sometimes, people only understand your silence after they ignored your words. And even then, their understanding may come too late. Too late to repair the trust. Too late to make you feel safe. Too late to bring back the version of you who still wanted to explain. And when that version of you is gone, do not feel guilty. She left because she was tired. She left because she kept standing in front of closed doors with open hands. She left because she realized that love should not require constant translation. She left because she finally understood that some people do not misunderstand you by accident. They misunderstand you because the truth would ask too much from them. So let that version rest. Let the overexplainer rest. Let the part of you that rehearsed conversations in your head rest. Let the part of you that tried to sound calm while breaking inside rest. Let the part of you that believed one more message would change everything rest. You do not need to keep proving your heart. You do not need to keep proving your intentions. You do not need to keep proving that you were hurt. You are allowed to know what happened and let that be enough. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself to people who only hear you when your words serve them. You are allowed to stop trying to be understood by those who benefit from your confusion. And one day, this will feel less like loss and more like freedom. You will feel the quiet relief of not needing to respond. You will feel the strength of not defending yourself. You will feel the peace of knowing that someone can think what they want and still not control who you are. You will stop fearing the stories people tell when they cannot control your silence. You will stop chasing the version of yourself they can accept. You will stop bending your truth into a shape that makes others comfortable. And slowly, you will come back to yourself, to your own voice, your own clarity, your own peace, your own ability to say, I know what I felt. I know what happened inside me. I know what I need now. And that knowing will become enough, because the strongest people are not the ones who make everyone understand them. The strongest people are the ones who no longer abandon themselves trying. They know that some people will never see them clearly, and still, they do not shrink. They do not beg. They do not chase. They do not keep bleeding in front of people who keep calling the wound imaginary. They simply choose peace. And when you reach that place, your life changes. You stop speaking where your words are wasted. You stop explaining where your heart is unsafe. You stop trying to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And you finally understand. Not everyone deserves the full story. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Not everyone deserves another explanation. Some people only deserve your distance. Some chapters only deserve silence. Some situations only deserve the moment you finally walk away. Because the day you stop begging to be understood is not the day your voice disappears. It is the day your voice finally returns to you. It is the day you stop using your words to chase people. It is the day you start using your silence to protect yourself. It is the day you stop asking the wrong people to see your heart and begin seeing it yourself. That is freedom, not being understood by everyone, but no longer losing yourself when someone refuses to understand you.